Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Penny Bishop, Dean of the BU Wheelock College of Education and Human Development. Welcome to our special edition webinar in our 2024-25 Conversations with the Dean series. As some of you know already, the focus of this webinar series is typically on recent events and important or hot topics within education. The series is deeply rooted in the ongoing efforts of our college and our overall focus on disrupting inequity and transforming systems. Each discussion focuses on the complexity of a particular issue and seeks to uncover the transformational opportunities that help students and communities thrive. And that is absolutely a focus of our discussion today. There is, in fact, a big question on the ballot next week here in Massachusetts, and the outcome will undoubtedly impact the systems that continue to shape or reshape educational experiences of students in the state. It's because of this that we've pulled together a group of faculty from BU Wheelock to talk about the roots of this debate, to provide perspectives from a range of vantage points, and to discuss the potential implications of the results. So before I turn to our discussants today, I'd like to start with a little bit of background to frame the issue and the ballot initiative. So here you'll see a screenshot from the Massachusetts voting guide prepared by the Secretary of State's office. As you'll see on the slide, the proposed law would eliminate the requirement that a student pass the Massachusetts Comprehensive Assessment System tests, or MCAS as they're widely known, in order to receive a high school diploma, and instead would require the student to complete a set of coursework that aligns with the state standards as identified by the district. So according to the Commonwealth's Red Book voting guide, proponents of the initiative, or those voting yes, state that, quote, high standards help keep school great and assessments are needed. The MCAS is a one-size-fits-all exam that fails to measure other student achievement measures such as GPA, coursework, and teacher assessments. By replacing MCAS as a graduation requirement, they contest, quote, teachers will be able to stop teaching to a test and unburden students from a make or break standardized test. On the other hand, opponents of the initiative, or those voting no, raise concerns about the important consistent signal that MCAS creates about student readiness and suggests that doing away with the only statewide graduation standard will actually increase education inequality in the Commonwealth. Clearly, there's a lot to unpack here. To get things started, I'd like to welcome my colleagues into the conversation. I'm very grateful that they're here. I'll invite each of them to introduce themselves and to share a little bit about their background so as to give you a sense of the perspectives and experiences they've held. And we'll also place links to their bios in the chat for a more full background. So welcome, Drs. Bryson, Goodman, and Smith-Mumford. So pleased to have you here with me today. And I'll invite Dr. Bryson to get us started.
Great. Thank you so much, Dean Bishop. Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Dean Bishop and Megan, for hosting this event just days before the election. I am a faculty member in elementary education and literacy education, and I study family literacy projects as tools to bridge home and school. At BU Wheelock, I prepare elementary teachers and reading specialists who serve children in grades K through 12, and I teach most of my courses on site in Boston Public Schools and Chelsea Public Schools. I am originally from Queens, New York. I attended and graduated from New York City Public Schools. I'm a first-generation college student and a former and proud Chelsea Public School classroom teacher. I've served on multiple Department of Elementary and Secondary Education committees and working groups, and pertinent to this talk today, I've served on an MCAS development committee. Finally, I'm an elected school committee member in the town of Wilmington, where I've served this community since 2017 as chair and vice chair. Question 2 has been on the minds of many, and I'm thrilled that we're providing a space to discuss the implications of the upcoming vote. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Dr. Goodman.
Thanks very much. Really glad to be here. I'm an associate professor here at Wheelock, where I study education policy, which means that I use various statistical methods to try to evaluate the impact that education policies in the both K-12 and higher education spaces have on student outcomes. And so this question is very relevant from a policy perspective. I've done a lot of my work here in Massachusetts. I have 3 kids in the Cambridge public schools. And before I went to do my PhD, I was a public high school math teacher in Watertown, Massachusetts, exactly in the years when MCAS first became a high school graduation requirement. So a personal connection to the history here. So thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Smith-Mumford.
Josh, I could have done without that last bit. Now I feel like the old, because I started my career when MCAS, I started my administrative career when MCAS was introduced. And so I spent 19 years as a pre-K to 9 principal. And then I began, actually before that, as a guidance counselor, high school guidance counselor, then went on to be a principal of 9th grade campus and then a pre-K to 8. And I taught as an adjunct at BU from 2009. And my higher ed focus, once I became full-time in 2020, was always been around looking at leadership, diversity, and issues of equity, and how to engage the community. Community engagement was at the top of my thoughts about how we best serve students. I'm presently the field director for the Education Doctorate program in pre-K to 12 and pre-K to 12 ed leadership. And I mentor and coach principals from across the state, particularly looking at education leaders of color and providing an opportunity for them to come together to think about reflecting on the work they do, needing self-care and supporting one another. And so I always think about this job, school leaders, as one of the loneliest in education. There's only one person with the title of principal in any given, in most cases, more models are being developed. So thank you for having me join this panel. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. And thanks to each of you for making the time for this conversation on a busy Friday. For those of you attending the webinar, you can see that we have a rich assembly of experiences and areas of expertise here with us today. And I want to encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar through the Q&A feature that you'll see on your screen. And we will do our very best to weave in as many of those as possible during the conversation and also try to leave time at the end. So please don't hesitate. Keep those questions coming. So Piper, I'd love to start with you. You have an important on-the-ground perspective, as you just described, having served as a school guidance counselor, a school leader, and in fact, you served in the role of principal prior to the 2003 adoption of MCAS as a graduation requirement, and then for nearly 15 years afterward. I'd love to have you share with our guests from your vantage point a little bit about teaching and learning, the teaching and learning environment in schools, how it's been shaped by statewide standards and the standardized assessments. You know, where have the positives been? Where have the problematic unintended consequences been?
Thank you. As I thought about the question, I kept saying there's a reason it's a challenge, right? It's a complex issue. And so it's not easy to unpack complex issues in the time frame we have, but I'm going to do my best to offer my perspective for the time we have. But I really do believe that educators need to recognize that we continue to be at the forefront of looking at how we can best serve all students. And that comes in lots of different ways. And the complex problems are a part of what helps us to really try to address the needs of the diverse students that we have. And so that's what keeps me engaged in the field and part of why I continue to want to be a part of how we come together in the field to understand what our roles are and how we can work together. So my early years as a school leader was shaped by the cultural shift that was needed when MCAS was introduced. And so I had to, along with the team, and when I say I never did any of this alone. It was always a team of folks how we were going to help our school community come to terms with this high stakes, really pressure-ridden exam on students who were really just beginning to understand who they were as learners. And so that for me was part of the first challenge. How in the lower grades were we going to have our students perform on a standardized test that was important, but the way in which we initially felt confined was that we didn't have our parent community supporting us. And so in this affluent community where I worked, students were already going off to high powered schools, that there was already this sense that our teachers and our school structures were doing a good job. And so this test, why did we need? And so it was a convincing early on that this was important. And so I use the analogy often when I talked with my families about being on a baseball team. So like, we're going to practice, your teachers are getting you ready. And then the day of the game, we're going to do our very best. I mean, I can remember like cheerleader, we can do it. And for the most part, I mean, it didn't come the first year or the second, because the other thing, some parents said, I'm not sending my child in. They're nervous, they're fragile. This is not going to help them become better students in the moment or with the big picture. So we tried really hard to get another perspective about the importance of having all of our students see the MCAS as something that wasn't to punish, but it was to help us understand how to better help those who needed more help, different help. And so eventually, the analogy worked for some families and some students, but we ran up against not having the information in a timely way. So this is the positive was that we all gathered together as a school team and said we wanted to give our students everything we felt they needed in order to do well, and that we saw how this could be helpful. And so one of the real positive things as a leader that came from MCAS was that we shifted this punitive kind of stance that entered, and we looked at what were the results telling us. And sometimes the challenge was not getting those results in a timely way, right? So they take it in the spring, and then in the fall we get the results, and we would find that it was already a new year, new teachers. So that was hard. That was hard to make good sense. We had the data, we used it for planning, but it was still really clear about who was suffering most. And it was a no surprise. And so teachers would say, it's just confirming what we knew. And I said, so now what do we do? How do we create a format, a plan? And what we did, I think, transformed how we were acting as a school, because we used our faculty meetings. We rolled up our sleeves and we said, how do we give the best experience? Not drill and kill, but how do we come together as a faculty and share our best practices? How do we talk about what we believe is important instructional strategies? And so we aligned better from grade to grade. We came together in ways that really helped our students, I think, in the end, feel better about themselves, though we always came up against the same group of students, right, who were always not performing at the level that we all wanted them to. And so the different strategies, no matter how we turned ourselves sort of inside out, had more time on task, had more instructional coaches. Our angst was always about this one group, the less privileged, the multilingual, the special education students who did not have the same kinds of supports as many of their peers continued to lag behind. So it was always trying to figure out how better to address what the MCAS results was telling us. And the public nature of it made it difficult as well. Mm-hmm. We did a lot of great things, but they didn't get the same publicity as our MCAS scores.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. My goodness, Piper, you've really sort of laid out the complexity of the issue so well from an on-the-ground perspective. So thank you for that. And I'm sure that much of what you have just identified is probably resonating with Josh right now. As you mentioned, Josh, you were a teacher, and so I can imagine that some of this is ringing true for you. And I also know that much of your professional career has been engaging with assessment data from a research perspective here in Massachusetts and nationally. You've raised concerns publicly about the potential equity implications if the measure does pass. Can you share more about why you think keeping this requirement in place is important?
Absolutely. I'm a parent of public school kids. I'm a former public high school math teacher. I am completely sympathetic to the arguments that MCAS is not a perfect system. I agree with folks who think it takes too many hours of actual testing administration, that it's extraordinarily slow to report results. I just saw my kids' MCAS scores, I don't know, last week, and they didn't even remember taking them, 5 months ago. We should absolutely want these things to be better. My take is that eliminating the MCAS as a high school graduation requirement is probably not the way to do this. And so, as I said, I taught some of the earliest cohorts subject to these requirements, and I really appreciate Piper's sort of image of feeling like, as a teacher, having this exam out there let you be a coach, and that you were sort of helping those kids tackle this test together in service of a clear goal, as opposed to the dynamic that sometimes happens, which is if it's just the teacher writing the test, the students just spend all their time begging you to write easier tests or grade them more easily. And I was reminded in a recent Boston Globe editorial that before the MCAS was actually a graduation requirement, high school students didn't take the exam very seriously. It's just very clear they didn't put a lot of effort into it. And that dramatically weakened MCAS as an accountability tool. And I think what I'd like to spend my couple of minutes right now doing is just making the case that we shouldn't want to weaken our accountability tools, that strong accountability from the state and from states in general turns out to be a deeply important tool for raising educational standards generally, and actually for equitable treatment of students. And so I just want to spend a minute talking about some research evidence from the world of education policy, some of which I've done, some of which other people have done, that suggests that meaningful state accountability systems can actually help many more students than they hurt. And so the basic theory is that state accountability systems, the idea is that they should help ensure, if they're designed well, that schools pay attention to all students. And that's something that doesn't always happen without external pressure. And let me just give you a little bit of evidence about that. If you just look in the sort of time trends over the last couple of decades in national test scores from something like the National Assessment of Educational Progress, arguably the most rapid rise in numeracy and literacy rates among young children in this country happened in the first decade after the No Child Left Behind Act passed, and in recent years have sort of flattened out as some of those accountability schemes were weakened under further revisions of that federal law. We have clear evidence from researchers like Tom Dee and Brian Jacobs that No Child Left Behind made students, particularly young students, more numerate, and that those effects were stronger for the more disadvantaged students in every state, in part because those accountability schemes actually pushed state and local governments to spend more money on schools so that their results would improve. A team of sociologists and economists at Harvard about a decade ago showed that in Texas, schools that were at risk of failing under that state's accountability scheme ended up investing more in their students, who had much more successful careers as a result of that. So if you follow these kids in the long run, it seems like the accountability pressure helped them. And my own work shows that in the 1980s, when US states started increasing their high school graduation requirements, those increased high school graduation requirements, particularly in mathematics, improved the long-term economic outcomes, particularly of Black students who schools were not already enrolling in those valuable courses, absent the state's pressure to do so. So the common theme in all this is that schools and teachers, though we do good work on average, sometimes have a tendency to neglect the most disadvantaged student groups out there, and states can sometimes step in and help that. And I think that's one of the reasons you see folks like Governor Healy and Attorney General Campbell and Education Secretary Tutwiler and the Massachusetts Superintendents Association opposed to question 2. And I'll just voice one last concern I have sort of from the standpoint of keeping our public schools strong. And that's the following. I'll make a prediction that if question 2 passes, we're going to see further parental flight from our public schools, particularly among more advantaged families. So in the last 5 years, Massachusetts public school enrollment has dropped by about 4%, and seems like even more so among higher income families. And largely because of, I think, a combination of remote schooling and the elimination of advanced coursework options, causing a lot of parents to lose faith that schools are committed to high standards. And my fear is that question 2 reinforces that impression. So my hope is that that folks sort of vote no on question 2, but take seriously the concern that if there are students who are struggling to succeed under that system, what we should do is come up with the resources to help them and get them to the skill level that we think a high school degree should represent. So I think there are better ways to do accountability than throwing away that statewide graduation requirement. And I'd love to see a serious conversation about the investments we should be making.
Thank you so much, Josh, for that thoughtful response. I really appreciate it. So building on something that you mentioned, that this ballot initiative has really spotlighted some atypical political divides, hasn't it? So we have Governor Healy and Attorney General Andrea Campbell in firm opposition to the question. Senator Elizabeth Warren and Chair of the Massachusetts Ed Committee, Jason Lewis, have publicly indicated that they'll vote yes. So I'd love to turn to Jen, with your many hats that you shared with us as you introduced yourself. I'm curious about the one that you mentioned about being on a school committee, as a school committee member. With that kind of political landscape, how does a question like this, where there appears to be quite a divide, play out within a community?
Thank you, Dean Bishop. That's a great question. And I'll be honest, I have not felt a major divide among parents and caregivers, our largest constituent. So as a school committee member, that is particularly who I am talking with on a regular basis. I have not heard strong opposition to eliminating the MCAS as a graduation requirement across my own school committee colleagues and other school committee members across the state. Most of the conversations I have with families start like this. What do you think we should do about question 2? Jen, how should I vote? What happens if we don't have the MCAS? So I begin by explaining that we are not eliminating the MCAS, but we are removing the MCAS as a graduation requirement. I tell them that students will still take the test. We will still have those results to use what they were intended for, to have a standardized report of schools across the state. As a school committee member who oversees policy, budget, and superintendent evaluation, I often rely on my experience as a classroom teacher, teacher educator. Most importantly, I listen to the experts, those in the classroom, building leaders, those leading the schools who intimately know what's happening inside those buildings, what goes into having a high school diploma. One of my favorite quotes is, those who aren't there should make suggestions, and those who are there should make decisions. This was brought to us by those who are there doing this work. One of the major arguments is that one standardized test tells us if students are ready for the workforce. I would argue that teachers and administrators across our Massachusetts high schools know what signals successful completion of high school. Massachusetts, as we know, is a top performer on NAEP, and of those top performers, only 2 continue to have this requirement, Massachusetts and New Jersey, and both are looking to remove it. I'm a strong supporter of programs of study, MCAS accreditation, and an array of courses that excite and engage students. Coursework that promotes critical thinking, citizenship, collaboration, to me would seem essential skills for being in the workforce or college career ready. I would argue that focusing so heavily on MCAS is narrowing the curriculum, especially for those who might need remediation in order to pass the MCAS year after year. They're being denied those opportunities to take more rigorous courses, courses that might promote teamwork and collaboration, courses that they get to choose what to take. As a parent of a child who just graduated from a public school, who is now a freshman at BU, I would say that the opportunity to take electives and have opportunities to really stretch her thinking across a variety of courses was really essential. Let me be clear, I am a supporter of MCAS. I say this all the time. Although I am an advocate for a revised test that includes a more comprehensive and innovative assessment, utilizing performance assessment, a more holistic framework with multiple measures. I taught before MCAS, I taught during the rollout of MCAS. I asked to be moved to a testing grade. I was a 2nd grade teacher and I said, oh, I want to be in 3rd grade so I know what it's like. I was so intrigued with this assessment and all that we as teachers could learn from those results and how that might impact our vertical alignment, which is consistency from grade to grade. And I use those MCAS scores, I use those trends to help us develop curriculum, to fill in some of those gaps. The state uses this data to examine schools across the Commonwealth and provide support where needed. It should never have been a competency exam with children facing those high stakes. We have programs of study, graduation requirements, and GPAs that do that for us.
Thank you so much, Jen. So I'm going to ask you and Piper to put on a slightly different hat, if you would, given that you both prepare educators for a future in the classroom or in a building or district leadership position. We're facing this vote next week, and I'm wondering how you think the outcome of the vote will shape the work you do in training educators for the system that they either already work within or are about to work within. And then maybe more specifically, if it stays, how do you help them think about this context? This, whether it's a narrative or a reality, this context of about teaching to the test. Piper, will you start us off?
Yeah, so thank you. I really just want to echo, Jen, you said what your comments, because I think as I think about meeting with and teaching future education leaders and teachers already in the classroom, there is this sense of who's listening to us. We're the voices in the schoolhouse, and what I feel will change and not change. What I think will change is this perhaps a sense of, and not it's not all consistent across every school and every teacher that MCAS is as a graduation requirement should go, but the distinction that we have accountability tools, assessment tools. No one is saying, oh, we should throw it out. So I think what I've been doing is really trying to help school leaders look at how they are providing support to the teachers. And I don't see it changing. What I do worry is if it doesn't pass, that it's no way that they won't still feel compelled to teach to the test. I think I used to say, if the test measures what we're doing, there's standards-based curriculum and instruction, then what's wrong with the test measuring that? And what we know is that sometimes that's not what the test does. And sometimes our students don't have the life experiences that the test might require. And I think the test has gotten better over the years. But I think this problem, as Jen outlined so beautifully, of only using this one measure to determine whether a student gets a high school diploma is just faulty. That our most fragile, vulnerable students who do everything else that we ask, but have so much trouble with that, I believe as a education leader, that it is imperative to really give the message that we care about all the students. And that even if it's 1% who continue to struggle, I give another analogy. If you take 100 kids on a field trip and you come back with 99, that's 1%. That's not okay. So if you're the child of that one child that doesn't come back, or that in that group of children who continually year after year to struggle, I want to raise that up as why we need to continue to go at, well, okay, what's another way of doing this? How can we get better at really not only being accountable, but taking into account the whole child, everything that we know is important in children's teaching and learning experience.
One of the things I appreciate about what's coming out in all three of your responses is the commitment to serving the population that tends to be least well served. I really appreciate how you're each elevating that. Jen, what do you think?
I think the outcome will not change how I prepare pre-service teachers to teach. I'll continue to support our students as they develop principles and best practices of literacy education. I will continue to teach my students about the Massachusetts frameworks to review and learn how to use high quality instructional materials, the importance of using data all the time, not just this one time, but all the time to inform our instruction and teaching, and to use the MCAS as a genre. It's a testing genre. That's how I approached it as a classroom teacher, and that is how I approach it with my teachers who are learning to be teachers. It is one piece of the puzzle, but it is not the whole puzzle. How we measure what children know is the larger question. What does it mean to hold a high school diploma? Is it simply a passing score on 3 subjects, ELA, math, and science? Or is it also social studies, art, music, PE, collaboration, critical thinking, stamina, joy? Like to talk about joy. I don't think our schools will see a significant change. They're already focused on frameworks, programs of study, the mass core requirements. Where I do believe we'll see the change will be on the type of support our students will receive who are in the not meeting or partially meeting categories. Removing this as a graduation requirement does not change the additional support we'll provide, the array of courses and the performance assessments, but it will provide students, even this small percentage that we're talking about, the opportunity to receive a diploma for the 4 years of coursework that they had completed. It will support our most marginalized learners to know that a few days of testing does not summarize their entire high school career. Our students who are learning English, our students with ADHD and severe anxiety, our children from low-income areas who've been panicked about these exams can now focus on their learning, not their ability to break down the exam. I also believe we'll see an even lower dropout rate. I don't see a yes vote on this question to be an opportunity for lower standards. I think this is an opportunity to broaden the discussion, to focus on what learning is and how we capture that. I think most of us can agree that a single test could not have captured all that we learned in high school. If this does pass, I hope the largest shift we'll see will be in how the state will allocate funds so all schools can be NEASC accredited. Perhaps a requirement for all schools to have statewide core requirements, and then finally, attention to the test itself.
Thank you very much. That's a very thoughtful answer, and I appreciate that. It's such a complex issue, and I'm wondering a little bit about the idea that this has essentially been is being viewed as a policy-making tool. And Josh, maybe we could borrow your brain on this one a little bit. It's not the first time that a major education initiative has shown up as a ballot question. And I'm wondering if you have any perspective on this as a policy-making tool. Are there examples of past ballot initiatives, and how have they played out? And what, if anything, will happen or will have to happen policy-wise if this goes into effect?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think the best analogy is that I think it was maybe eight years ago, we had a question on the Massachusetts ballot about lifting the cap on the number of charter schools in the state. That sparked a conversation. I was about to say a good conversation. I'm not sure it was a good conversation. It sparked a conversation about that particular kind of policymaking. I guess I am generally pretty skeptical about making serious policy changes through ballot referenda. I don't tend to think it's very healthy in the sense that when state legislatures and policy-making entities are functioning well, policies like designing your state's education accountability scheme are the result of bringing a number of constituencies together, hashing out conversations, and coming up with, having complex conversations to come up with answers to these complicated questions. What we're all going to do on Tuesday, or some of us have already done through early voting or mail-in ballots, is just to sort of check a box yes or no. That actually seems like a pretty poor way of making policy in my mind. So separate from the way people are going to vote, I don't think any of us should feel good that this is the way that process is playing out. And it may speak to the fact that in Massachusetts, a lot of folks are frustrated with the way our policymaking processes play out and the transparency of legislative procedures. But I wish this were part of a conversation about fixing the accountability system as a whole, as opposed to just shutting down or keeping one piece of it, and then that having to potentially trigger a bunch of reactions later, which is maybe why the legislature has said, or at least some legislators have said, that if this referendum passes, they will just legislate it away and undo the results. So I don't know how that process will work out, but to me, it doesn't feel like a good way to make policy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you. That's helpful. I want to think a little bit about how, if this goes through, the initiative will take effect immediately. Jen, maybe returning to you, what will that look like in districts who have to make decisions for seniors getting ready to graduate?
That is a great question, Dean Bishop. I mean, I don't know exactly what it will mean in terms of the next day, how that looks. I haven't asked my town high school principal, like, what will happen? I'm sure my superintendent has, who I believe is probably on this webinar watching. I'm sure they've had those conversations. As a school committee member, I would not be in direct conversation with sort of the high school principal, right? I only talk with the superintendent. So I don't know what they're actually going to do the very next day, but I don't think in terms of the support that we will have been providing to someone who has not yet passed, that will not change. They will still be getting the support that they need. We will still be following up. We're not going to suddenly say, all right, you're good. I mean, that's not, I don't think what this is about, right? I think what this is about is we're still using this tool. We're using this tool for what it was intended, and we're using this tool, sure, to provide additional support. But this is not as a teacher in that year. And Josh, you said it great. You know, my child took this test and forgot they even took it by the time we got the results, right? I mean, I think that's really telling. And in some ways, I'm kind of like, good. Like, I don't want my child, right? I have 2 children. One is still in high school. Like, I don't want them waiting for those tests to come, you know. And one of the questions was, you know, as a parent, what does this mean for you? And like, I don't go on and on about it. Like, you got to work really hard. You got to like show them what you know. And I don't want them to be panicked about this, the 3 days across their high school career. My daughter, who just graduated, spent 4,320 hours learning in high school. Over 4,000 hours just in high school, right? That's a lot of work that our children are putting into their coursework, to programs of study, to choosing electives that are going to really help them feel prepared for the workforce or college. And so I try not to overemphasize what this is. Yes, I want you, and I hear Josh's point, you know, will it change the scores? Will children not care as much? I mean, I've never seen that in my own students or my own children in terms of, oh, it doesn't matter anyway. Like, I think they pull that from us. So if we're telling them, we're continuing to tell them, this is important, and we really do need accurate data. I think all children, grades K through 12, will hear that, you know, and do that work.
Mm-hmm. You know, you won't be surprised to know that we're getting a lot of questions from our audience, and people are eager to chime in here. A lot of the questions have to do with this notion of narrowing curriculum and doing so in a high stakes testing environment. Can any one of you jump in to say more about how continuing the test, because MCAS isn't going away, so how continuing the test but removing the graduation standard will change that problem we're all agreeing about?
I think I'll just add, sort of pick up where Jen left off about, I'm not sure what tomorrow will look like or the 6th of November will look like if the measure passes in terms of this year's graduating class. But I'm sure that whatever's been put in place, we're not suddenly going to say, oh, you don't need to do that anymore because it's no longer a graduation requirement. I believe that most educators really want students to graduate being able to feel good about those 4,000 plus hours that they put in, and that one measure doesn't tell you how prepared they are for whatever comes next. And so I think it will be a continuation. What I hope, though, is that it opens more broadly the other ways that teaching and learning can really help students to look at AI, to look at, I mean, what does our future require of them, our environment? So sometimes it becomes like so narrowly focused because it's not on the test and you have to pass this test to graduate. My hope is that it broadens our perspective around what we can engage our students around, and not worry so much that that's one measure that they must do, but there are multiple measures that we are looking at.
Mm-hmm. You've kind of inspired me to, Piper, to ask that sort of 30-second question. This will be sort of our last question for each of you in 30 seconds. Piper, Jen, and Josh, could you give everyone just a last word or piece of advice that they should take into the ballot booth? Who'd like?
I guess I'll start. I think one can desire better accountability systems, better ways for the state to help schools define what a high school diploma is, a clear set of graduation requirements, coursework, et cetera. You can want all those things. This ballot referendum doesn't get you any of them.
Thanks, Josh.
I'll chime in because then you can go last. No one wants lower standards. No one wants to change students' perspectives around what MCAS may have represented if it's been so negative. They want that change. But what I believe could make all the difference is this is the beginning of an ongoing conversation with both folks in the schools and folks at the state level about what do we need besides money, because we know many districts who continue to have poor performance need more support financially. And then how do we use that, and how do others? So some more collaboration, some more crosstalk, some more opportunities to try to get closer to what you were saying, Josh. What's a better tool? Thank you.
Thank you, Piper. Jen, last word?
Sure. I think that, you know, based on the conversations I've had with people, I would just remind everyone that we are not eliminating MCAS as a tool and removing it as a graduation requirement only. Again, those are the conversations I have mostly had. I think people are worried about removing it completely, and I totally understand that. Like I said, I am an advocate, and I think there's a lot of room to grow, and I think that we have a long way to go with that test. But I think doing this actually helps us to get to the better work of accountability. And I would really encourage people to think through, how would you have liked your high school career to be, your diploma to have been awarded to you? Would you have said that 3 days and 1 test was enough for them to say, yes, you've earned this? Or would you say it was all the courses I took, it was the programs of study, it was the progress monitoring day to day that really helped me to get where I needed to be for the next steps in my life? So that's what I would encourage people to think about as they head to the ballot.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I want to acknowledge that there were a lot of questions we couldn't get into today, and also that there are a number of links in the chat that really help provide alternative perspectives that might help folks. So many of the questions that have been raised are actually addressed in some of those terrific links that have been offered. So please do think to save those before you depart. It's clear that the one thing that is clear is that voters have a lot to consider when they head to the polls on Tuesday, or in voting early. And I want to personally thank each of you for participating in this special election edition of BU Wheelock's Conversations with the Dean. We're really fortunate to be in a community where, despite varying opinions or ideologies, we're able to talk through the complexities of an issue. This has been a great example of that. Before I officially close, I want to take a minute to encourage those of you who've not already mailed in your ballot or voted early in this year's election to make sure you turn up for in-person voting on Tuesday, November 5th. No matter how you intend to vote, I hope today was helpful in demonstrating just how important any single vote can be. And finally, I want to share that our next Conversations with the Dean event will be with Dr. Nermeen Dashush and digital producer Nika Bolden. We'll discuss the innovative strategies used in digital education, drawing in part from their experience working on projects such as PBS Kids' popular series, Lila in the Loop. See you next time, and thanks for coming.